going live. Where is this option? Send your lives. Send your live. And I'm going to watch this on my phone here and see if it starts playing. Oh, okay. So I'm going to have to turn that off my phone so I don't hear it. Okay. All right. Apparently we're live.
We're very smart technologically here.
We have clearly not ever done a live stream like this before. So we're just trying to make sure that we have it all running the right way. I guess there's not really a good way that we could follow and see if there's like questions anywhere or anything, unless I pull it up on. Well, I'll definitely turn it down on my phone this time. Okay. I can see a chat on my phone now. It's just muted. So, okay. Well, hi. I'm Nick Pollock from Roar Lions Roar. I'm joined by Matt DeBear. We're trying out this live stream thing for the first time. We'll be here for like maybe an hour. I don't know. We'll hopefully, we'll go a little longer if people chime in with questions and whatnot. We should, if it's all working correctly right now, be live currently on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and that's it. Just those three. So we'll try to do our best to try to hop across all three of those and see if there's questions anywhere. I would say probably the easiest way to send in questions while we're doing this, if you have them, is probably through Twitter. Maybe Matt, you can just hop on the Twitter on your phone and just check if anything comes in. But hi, Matt, how are you?
Good, Nick. I'm fascinated by our ability to do this. We've talked about doing something like this for as long as I think we've done podcasts. And the fact that it appears to be working, and according to YouTube, there are 5 people watching right now, 2 of which are you and I, because I think we both have it open, like to check on any questions or anything that come in.
All right, well, so you close it and open Twitter instead. I have it open.
So 3 people that aren't us are actually watching us try and navigate live streaming football preview, whatever this is.
Yeah. We've talked about this a lot, and I know in the future something else that we actually want to do is, for like a game like Rutgers or Maryland, or like just hopefully a lower stakes game that people don't care about as much. We'd think it'd be a lot of fun to do just like a Roar Lions Roar broadcast version where, we can all mute our TVs and we can just all talk about the game instead. So if this goes well, then that's one step closer to being able to accomplish that long hoped for dream that I think we've had. So
yeah, I can't tell if it's working on Facebook. I don't think it's on Twitter, but we are on YouTube.
Okay. That's fine. That's one out of three ain't bad. Yeah. I don't actually know. It's like the live stream through Twitter broadcast. Like it's not Spaces or anything. I don't think I've ever used Twitter broadcast before. So I don't know. I sounded like an 80-year-old man saying that, but it's fine. Let's talk about Penn State Purdue, because they are kicking off in what, an hour and 20 minutes from now.
Well, if we're starting at 8:00, yes, we are an hour and 20 minutes out. Team has arrived based on, as I monitor Twitter here for late breaking developments, from has arrived at Ross-Ade Stadium. Okay. That is about as far as we've made it at this point. But
that's a good start.
No, we are an hour and 20 or so minutes out from Penn State kicking off, which should hopefully be a pretty exciting 2022 football season.
Before we talk about the game specifically, I don't know if you and I have done any podcasting so far this year aside from a couple previews early on. What is just your general kind of confidence level going into this season?
Can I say medium?
Sure.
No, we've talked a lot, off the air, so to speak, in the last, month or two, that this team feels like a games. It could win 11 games or anything in between, and none of that would be all that surprising. Yeah. I've used the line a couple different previews and stuff that I've been on with you or Bill or Matt. I haven't talked to Craig yet, but the different previews we've done, that this team is every bit as talented, if not more so, than everyone but Ohio State on the schedule.
Mhm.
And a lot of times talent, especially in college football, wins out, but this team has enough questions and enough youthful stupidity, I'll say, and inexperience, that I wonder, especially during, we'll say, the first half of the year, as these guys that haven't played a whole lot get their feet under them, you're going to have mistakes. You're going to have, potentially major mistakes that are just the nature of guys having not had experience at this level. But I think there's so much talent really all over the field that it's not hard to see them, just out talenting 8, 9, 10 teams on the schedule, but at the same time out stupiding a couple teams to the point where that talent advantage is negated a little bit. But no, I'm excited. It's been a weird fall for me. As you know, I'm getting ready to move. As I don't know if you can see in the background here, I've got boxes all around me. So it hasn't had that usual kind of football buildup um, hype that you kind of start getting as the weather cools down a little bit and you get closer to the season. I haven't felt that, but I woke up this morning and checked Twitter like I normally do, and there were the game day tweets, and that kind of got my blood flowing a little bit.
Yeah.
And it took longer to hit me this year, but I'm excited. I get that excitement of going into a fresh year, and with Penn State having a lot of these exciting questions to be answered, I think that has me looking forward to tonight and in the next few months here.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same wavelength with you as far as this season kind of until today felt like it was still months away. Um and I don't know. I mean, I guess for me personally it might be because the Mariners are playing meaningful baseball in September and late August for the first time in, well, not the first time, but in a way that should lead them to the playoffs for the first time since 2001. So and the Mariners are I love Penn State. The Mariners are my first love. So I woke up, they played a game at 10 a.m. Pacific time today. So I even today I was still like, Mariners first, then Penn State. But I don't know. Maybe it's also just because I think it also is partially due to the fact that this season we just know so little. Like there are the things we do. Like we know what Sean Clifford is. We have a pretty good idea of what he will do as long as he's healthy. We know guys like PJ Mustipher. We know guys like Joey Porter Jr. and Jair Brown. But there's a lot that we don't know about this team. Like we think the cornerback group and the safeties, the secondary in general, it looks like it is loaded with potential NFL talent. Um, and not in a way that feels too abstract. Like it feels like it's ready to be on the primetime stage right now, which is cool, but it's also like we don't know for sure. So a little uncertainty there. Like we don't really know much about how the linebackers are going to play. We have Curtis Jacobs flipping over from the Sam to the Will, so there's a little uncertainty there. Tyler Elsdon at middle linebacker hasn't started before. The offensive line constantly in a state of flux, finally hoping that this is the year. The running backs, two freshmen probably going to lead the way. So like there's just a lot of unknowns about this team. And I feel like the more unknowns you have, at least for Penn State, because they haven't had that many in the last however many years, it's like they typically come into seasons and we feel pretty good about knowing what they're going to be and how it's going to go down. But this year really feels like a blank slate in a lot of ways, which is weird because it's not, because as we've talked about, first time in a long time, they are coming into a season with the same quarterback and offensive coordinator from the season before. Like that's a legitimate starting place. Like that should make it theoretically easier. But there's just so much unknown and it's weird but in a fun way.
Yeah, it's and I think that's what we like about college football, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
you know you're a Seahawks fan, I'm a Browns fan, so there's massive uncertainty every year for both of us. It feels like, especially this season. But in college
Sure.
football, it's every year your roster is changing over. You got guys graduate, you're bringing in the freshman recruits, and now you've got the added transfer portal and the immediate eligibility factor to take into account. And I think that's the exciting thing is, this team has well documented, gone 11-11 the last 2 years. Really struggled down the stretch last year after the Sean Clifford injury. But hope springs anew, especially in college football, where especially in Penn State's case, they've brought in 2 running backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who have just been getting rave reviews, as I'm sure everyone in watching is aware. That's excitement. This fresh injection of youthful energy from 2 guys that I think we expect to see a lot of tonight. Mitchell Tinsley, the transfer wide receiver from Western Kentucky, that I think we all expect to kind of take over, a portion of that workload that Jahan Dotson got last year. Chop Robinson at defensive end, Adiza Isaac coming back from injury after missing all of last year. Just all these fun new additions or returning situations like Adiza Isaac, for example, creates a cool dynamic, creates a lot of questions and uncertainty. And I think that's why we're not really sure what to expect tonight and going forward. But it feels different than it has the last couple years, where it felt like we kind of knew what Penn State was. There were some surprises certainly along the way, but for the first time in a couple years, outside of quarterback in the secondary, what's running back going to look like? Who's going to be the guy at wide receiver? Penn State has a defensive line. They can probably go 4 or 5 deep at both defensive end and defensive tackle, and not lose a whole lot there. The safety opposite Brown with Brisker off to the NFL. The just general question of what is linebacker going to look like. There's that uncertainty that you mentioned, but there's that excitement of what is, how is this all going to come together? Who's going to step up? Who's going to take advantage of all these opportunities?
Yeah. Real quick, if you're just joining us, Nick Pollock, Matt DeBear. We have to do that because we're live now. From Roar Lions Roar. Just doing a little live pregame thing here before the game gets going. We're just kind of talking about the state of the Penn State roster overall right now, and talking about how there's uncertainty, but it's a fun kind of uncertainty. I want to switch gears here for a second, just because we've got time. And by the way, if you have any questions about the game, the team, your preference of dogs, whatever you want to talk about, toss a question in the chat on YouTube if you have any questions. We'll be happy to answer. We got the news earlier today that there is a vote happening, and I believe it said, is it tomorrow or next Friday, about the playoff?
I believe it's tomorrow.
Yeah, so we got news that there is a vote happening either tomorrow or a week from tomorrow to potentially bump the college football playoff up to 12 teams. I didn't get a chance to read more. I don't know if that was talking about next year or maybe 3 years from now, whatever it will be. But and Adamar, I do see your question. We'll get to that in just a second. I'm just curious, Matt, what your general thoughts are on the idea of a 12-team playoff.
I'm beyond excited. If it goes through, and I'm sure there's a million questions on that end to be answered as far as how it all looks and TV contracts and whatnot, but if it goes through, it could happen as early as 2024, according to the different reports that are out there. No later than 2026, which is when the current ESPN contract with 4 teams expires. But I think it's in the big picture, it's good for college football, in my opinion. We all know that the last, really since the playoff has come in, dominated by a handful of teams. And I think that has further contributed to, college football has always been a top heavy sport, but it's further contributed to the Ohio States and Alabamas, and for a long time there, Clemson before last year. The rich continuing to get richer, by which I mean on the recruiting trail primarily. because these same handful of teams are the ones that Georgia, obviously, that continue to play for national championships. And I made the comment earlier today that I think ever since really the Bowl Alliance, even before the BCS came into existence, but certainly when the BCS took over, this has kind of been where college football has been going, in my opinion, for, oh gosh, what's it, 20 years now or more, which really dates me and it's terrifying in so many ways. But I think not immediately, but over the long run, you're going to see the same handful of teams in all likelihood, especially early on, continue to be the ones that make the Final Four, that make the championship game, that are winning national titles. But I think that additional access for a team like Penn State, for example, it's not hard to look at 2016, 2017, maybe even 2019, those three teams that won 11 games having chances to get into the playoff. And as the saying goes, if you get in, you have a shot. And strange things can happen, especially when you're playing, one-off games. And I'm not saying a national championship in any of those years, and maybe they don't even win a game, but the opportunity to then go and say, hey, to five-star quarterback, whoever in the 2024-25 class, hey, we were right there. We had a shot. We like you to get us over the hump here. And that's true for team not only Penn State, but think of like Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin, all these teams that have had really, really good regular seasons, but for the most part have sniffed that top four because you lose one game and you're done. Part and increasing that access, you're going to see, I imagine, as a result of this, you're going to see some sort of system where you're going to have more regional representation. You're going to see teams from the West Coast. You're going to see teams, in the Midwest and down south and kind of all over the country, more regionally represented. But you're also, those teams then go out and they're able to, make the case that, hey, we were close and we need more talent, and we can start to compete with those teams that for the last 10 years have dominated the sport.
We will get back to that in just a second. Real quick. Yes. Thank you, Doug. I see that comment. And Harry, I don't know if it's Harry and your last name is A-R-E-I, Aria, or if it's just Harry A and you work at REI, whatever it is. But yes, both Matt and I are wearing our home field shirts right now. Our sponsor for the podcast. Awesome sponsor. I love working with them. Shirts are very comfortable. If you have not had a chance to do so yet, and you've yet to order from Home Field, go ahead, hop on the website, use Roar Lions Roar as your code, get 15% off. Adam R had a question here and actually had another comment here. Yes, yeah, totally. So to Adam, to your second point there, he said he thinks that it makes the season so much more interesting even after 1 to 2 losses. And I agree with that. I think, the quick argument when people who are against expanding the playoff, the first thing they bring up is, oh, well, you're devaluing the regular season. Well, to your point, Matt, are you? Because all of a sudden you've made it so losing one game is not the end of the world. If anything, I think you've made more regular season games matter because there's more teams that now, have a chance to take a bite at the apple, and it's not a lost season after, like, if Penn State loses to Ohio State, the season's not done. Like, you still have it. And not that the season was done previously, like there's still bowl games and there's still fun stuff to play for, but it's just, like, in my opinion, it actually adds more value to the regular season. Plus the value of, if we have 12 teams and we have regional playoff games in the first round, like, you better believe that a team like Penn State is going to want to host, say, Clemson in the first round in Beaver Stadium in December rather than going down. Like, that's a massive advantage for Penn State, teams used to playing in cold weather. They will have to figure out how to get Beaver Stadium prepared to handle that in that cold weather, but that's another issue. Adam R asked a question earlier that I'm really glad he asked because it's something that we have touched on this preseason, but I think deserves a little more run than we've given it. And he said, do you think there will be a drop off in defense with the new system? Obviously referring to the change at defensive coordinator going from Brent Pry, who is now the head coach at Virginia Tech, to former head coach at Miami, Manny Diaz, who is the new defensive coordinator. Once again, real quick, Nick Pollock, Matt DeBear, Roar Lions Roar, live stream pregame. Love it. So the defense, from Pry to Diaz, I think the main thing that I think is going to change is that the Manny Diaz defense is going to be a lot more aggressive, and they are going to push the envelope a lot more in terms of attacking the backfield, trying to create sudden change plays, whether that's a big tackle for loss or a sack or a turnover, the most sudden change play. But that doesn't just have to mean a turnover. It can mean tackles behind the line too. I think that is going to be the main change. And also, Brent Pry played a very firm bend but don't break defense. There are going to be times this year where Penn State's defense breaks because they're going to be more willing to take chances to create that game changing play. And it is going to lead to more points for the opposition on probably several occasions. Like it's just going to happen. But overall, considering what we think Penn State's offense should be able to do, and what we saw last year when they, bend but don't break is great, but it leads to a lot of poor field positions for your offense. And we saw that that did not serve the Penn State offense very well last year. Even though they might give up more points with Manny Diaz leading the defense, it should more often than not also give them the chance to start in more positive field position. Matt, what do you think is going to be the main, or what do you think are going to be the main differences here with Diaz?
Well, I think that's it. It's different. I don't know if it's better or worse to answer the question. I think it's just going to be different than I think what Penn State fans have really seen for most of heck our lifetimes. Other than I think when James Franklin first arrived, with I'm even blanking on the dude Bob Shoop.
Bob Shoop.
You saw a little bit more of an aggressive style with him, more blitzing, more aggressive play from his secondary. But in general, I think Penn State defense going back decades really has been don't give up the big play, don't make mistakes, keep the ball in front of you, make teams go 12, 15, 18 plays to score on you, which is a really great system if you can execute it. And Penn State has, as we all know, historically executed that system very well. But I think the way the game has evolved to being much more offensively geared forces you as a defense to have to take more chances. You have to shorten the field. You have to create negative plays, which is really where Manny Diaz has excelled in his entire career. I know we focus a lot on, his tenure as Miami's head coach because it's most recent. But if you go back, to his several stops before he got to Miami, where he was defensive coordinator, they create negative plays. They create havoc. They force mistakes. And that's, I think, where Penn State needs to get to, especially as their offense, I think, continues to grow from a explosive standpoint. And that's why it's what Joe Moorhead did as an offensive coordinator. It's what Mike Yurcich is trying to do as an offensive coordinator, is create those explosive plays. And I think it's easier to do that with sudden change. It's easier to do that with short fields. I think a lot of Penn State's issues, I shouldn't say a lot, I think some of Penn State's issues last year, and really the last couple of years offensively, have stemmed in large part from, one, not having enough playmakers to run that explosive style system that they really want to do. But two, if they can't hit those explosive plays, they're having to go 75, 80, 85 yards every time they get the ball, whether it's after giving up a score or after the defense, forces a punt from the 45 or 50 yard line and they're forced back under their own goalposts. I think in the short term, I think we might see some growing pains just because it's so new. And I think as fans, we're going to have to get a little more adjusted to maybe giving up more big plays than we've seen. But I think hopefully this season, and then certainly long term, you're going to see a defense that, might give up some points, probably will give up some points, but is offset, like you said, by an offense that's able to hit the big plays independent of what the defense is doing, but also being set up with short fields, being set up in those sudden change situations where a defense maybe isn't ready to come on the field as quickly and you can catch them, unaware almost. I think it's largely applied. They miss Brent Pry. I think James Franklin has alluded to they're going to miss Brent Pry just from a a comfort standpoint, he's coached with him for going back to Vanderbilt. So it's two guys that have worked, knew what the other one was going to do. And so there is certainly going to be some adjustment, but I think hopefully we see it sooner rather than later. But I think certainly long term, and I think certainly as we get into the second half of this year, we're going to see the benefits of that style of defense. And I think recruiting wise, you're going to see long term the ability to draw in hopefully more of those elite athletes that you see at defensive end and at linebacker, because they want to play in a defense like that where they're putting up big numbers with whether it's sacks or interceptions or those havoc plays, where you see yourself on ESPN, you see yourself on social media, building that name as these elite players. And I think that's the kind of defense you think of it from an offense's perspective. What kind of offense does a quarterback and a wide receiver want to play in? The one where they're going to put up big numbers, the one where they're going to make big plays. I think the same goes on defense. I think that's, again, one of those long-term benefits you're going to see.
Yeah, I agree. And then real quick, Adam, MVP of the chat right now. Also noted, maybe this will help avoid some of those like one score late losses. Yeah, it definitely could. This, like we talked about, a more aggressive defense should potentially put you in a position to score more often and score faster and perhaps lead to more blowouts. Not that Penn State hasn't been able to blow teams out in the past, but hasn't really had the opportunity to do that a lot lately. If you want to be a chat MVP like Adam right now, go ahead, leave questions in the YouTube chat, or just comments. We can respond to anything. It doesn't have to be about Penn State. It doesn't have to be about the game tonight. Anything you want. We will transition to talking about more about this Purdue game in a second here, though. But the other point I want to make, I think this was something that Nate Bauer maybe said. Nate Bauer of On3, Blue Out Illustrated over there. Great site. Check them out. I think this is something he noted early on in practice about how an underrated benefit of the change in defensive coordinator was also that it would finally give Sean Clifford and the rest of the offense something different to go up against in practice, because Sean Clifford has been here for the last 16 years and he's been playing against the same defense in practice every year of his career here. It was a good defense to go against. Sure, it had a lot of really talented players to go up against, but there is something to be said for having now the opportunity to have trained extensively against multiple types of defenses from all those years with Pry and now this year with Manny Diaz. Like that is an underrated advantage of changing your defensive coordinator. And I think it's maybe something that we didn't touch on enough in the past about maybe like as a real beneficial thing for Brent Pry's defense to continually be going against different offense coordinators over the last how many years for Penn State, between Joe Moorhead, then Ricky Ronnie, then Kirk Shiraka, and now Mike Yurcich. Like they've had a lot of different looks. And I think it's given Brent Pry a really good chance to kind of zero in what he wants his defenses to look like. So, it's an interesting byproduct of, obviously you don't change defensive coordinators for the benefit of your quarterback on the practice field, but it's an interesting byproduct of what that change actually means for the team at large. Yeah.
No, I think that's one of those, under the radar. I don't know if it's a benefit or not, but I think it's just another impact. It's another impact of it that, I think for a guy like Clifford, especially, who's been here for like 15 years now, seeing, basically the same thing day after day, I think for a guy like that, it's really beneficial. I think you see so much turnover year to year, like I was saying earlier, with, transfers and guys leaving early and graduating and everything else, that I'm not sure long term it's a huge thing, but
right.
No, it's one of those, I think, especially in this immediate turnover, where I think it will be a positive.
Yeah. Before we dive into the Purdue game more specifically here in a second, real quick, anything as far as our NFL and Nittany Lions go, anything, surprising or notable that you noticed about, where our guys got cut, where they got kept, where they got signed. Tariq Castro-Fields just got signed, I think today, to Washington. Anything surprising there for you?
No, I don't follow it as closely as you do. Again, Browns fan, so the inspiration to pay attention to the NFL gets muted year after year for different reasons. But
Especially this
no,
year.
I was glad to see the whirlwind tour of Jesse Luketa, who went from being on the roster to being cut by Arizona, to being signed in the practice squad in the span of about 24 hours, because they were, I guess, had the opportunity to add someone else to the roster via a trade or something.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised to see Derek Tangelo was cut by Atlanta. I don't know if he got picked up on the practice squad or not, but I know he was kind of one of those social media stars, especially early in camp for Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it's good to see those guys. There weren't a whole lot of names, Penn State names, that were cut. Trace McSorley, I know, got waived, but that's kind of just a numbers game at quarterback, and I'm pretty sure he ended up back on the practice squad with the Cardinals.
Yeah.
But it was good to see not a lot of guys on that list. A lot of them were guys that, like I said, got caught in that numbers game where it's a little bit more of a, you've got to get down to, was it 53 or 55 guys on the roster that you have to be at by that day. But I'm excited to see, Micah Parsons, in his second year. Certainly a guy that got a ton of buzz last year, especially as the year went on for Dallas. I think year number 2, as a known quantity, I'm excited to see what he does. It pains me to say this again as a Browns fan. What Jason Oweh and Pat Freiermuth do in year number 2, those were two guys that really had solid rookie seasons for Pittsburgh and Baltimore, respectively.
Of course, Matt means Odafe Oweh.
Of course, my apologies to Odafe. But no, I think what's been cool in the last several years has been the number of guys that Penn State's put into the NFL, which then you can make the case, of course, that they put all these guys in the NFL and they've won 11 games the last 2 years. But I think having, as kind of a casual NFL fan, for lack of a better term, having guys like that to follow and look for highlights, on Sunday and Mondays, I guess Thursdays now too. That's kind of cool, and I'm sure for a lot of Penn State fans that maybe aren't huge NFL fans, being able to log on to Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and see guys they saw play at Penn State having solid NFL careers. I think it's cool, and I think it, again, State, I think it helps James Franklin and his staff walk into high schools and high school players' homes on recruiting trips and have guys that they can point to as that followed this path that made it.
Totally. Yeah. The only other two guys I wanted to mention there in a good way, surprising way, Rasheed Walker making the Packers 53 did not get waived. Great to see after, he had a pretty so-so year last year, but 7th round draft pick by the Packers. Clearly they saw enough of him to, keep him on the initial roster. They didn't want to risk losing him. So that's great. And then one, kind of with an asterisk because I believe they put him on the IR today, or he's going to go on the IR probably within the next couple of days. But John Reed in Seattle, I know the Seahawks are entering somewhat of a rebuilding year, but they also have a ton of talent at the cornerback position right now. So the fact that John Reed was able to keep a spot among that group was a really positive development for a guy who's bounced around a little bit, since he got in the NFL. So it's good to see him. It seems like he's, and obviously as a Seahawks fan, I love that. But also, it's cool for a guy like John Reed, who we know I'm sure he has lots of aspirations done as far as you'd like to end up working and see a lot of opportunities in the kind of the tech world that he's interested in. So that's a cool spot for him.
Hey, so to jump in real quickly, well, as we segue into the Purdue talk, the Onward State Sports Twitter account just put out that Nick Singleton is getting first team reps at kick returner. So without a depth chart, some of these warm up tidbits might be somewhat interesting, I suppose. I saw first team reps and I didn't get to kick returner when I started to mention that. So I was thinking maybe we might see the freshman start, but the first bit of warm up news, I guess, is starting to trickle out. So I'll keep my eye on that.
Cool. Once again, I'm Nick Pollock. He's Matt DeBear. We are two members of Rural Lions Roar, and we are here pre-gaming Purdue. Well, not pre-gaming in the fun way, I guess. I don't have a beer with me right now, but I probably should. Um, well, I only stopped working 12 minutes ago, so um, let's talk about this game. I think the very first thing, and I was listening to our friends over at the Solid Verbal, which also big shout out to the Solid. I don't know if I've said this yet, but big shout out to the Solid Verbal, and Ty Hildebrand, in particular, for kind of advising us on the best way to kind of up our podcast game, for lack of a better term. Now that we've kind of shut down the website and we're trying to focus on this full time, a lot of great advice. He's always been a great friend to the blog, to the site now, to the podcast now. So he's a great guy. We'll definitely have him on the podcast very soon. But big shout out to them. I was listening to their preview for this week, for week 1, and when they got to the Penn State Purdue game, Dan was bringing up the points that, it's a Thursday game at night at Purdue. How could you not want to pick Purdue in that situation? And I think the one thing for me when thinking about that specific part of this that's given me a lot of comfort is the fact that this is week 1 and that this isn't happening like week 10 or week 7 when a midweek game would actually be off schedule. But the fact that both teams have had the exact same amount of time to prepare, like, it's not weird. They've known that this has been the schedule for however many months now. Like, that part of this is not strange. So I think that classic Purdue weirdness magic does get neutered a little bit in this situation because of where it's occurring in the schedule, but it is still a little unnerving.
Yeah, I think the Thursday night factor is, I think, a unique dynamic, just kind of in and of itself. You're the game.
Yeah.
I know Pitt, West Virginia is going on right now, but
Oh, are they?
you're the
Honestly,
focal
I
point.
honestly had no idea Pitt and West Virginia were playing today until those tweets started surfacing, like, "Oh, how does it feel to be the second billing?" Like, I didn't even know you were playing today. I'm sorry.
But I think if you look at it from a Penn State perspective, I think opening last year on the road, with a big game at Wisconsin, like opening on the road for was it 7 straight years now they've opened the Big Ten on the road, and 12 of the last 13, something like that.
Yep.
So certainly a
Yep.
lot of experience opening conference play away from home. But I think that experience from a coaching staff perspective, I think, and for the guys that went through it last year, I think is a good experience to draw on. I don't think it's you're going into the same type of grinder like you went into in Madison. Obviously, different types of teams you're going up against. But Camp Randall at noon on a Saturday for the season opener for I believe they were 2 top 15 maybe teams at the time last year when they opened the season.
I think so.
Is in my opinion, a more intense dynamic, more intense environment than what they're going to face tonight. So I think the guys that went through that a year ago are going to see some benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, like you said, Nick, it's this is you're on equal footing. You had the same amount of time to prepare. Um, I would almost hazard more uncertainty from going to see from Penn State with all this turnover on offense. Jahan Dotson's gone. What are they going to do in the passing game? You've got 2 running backs that have gotten a lot of buzz on a defense that I don't believe has really played that well against the run the last several years. At the same time, though, Purdue loses their most dynamic defensive player in George Karlaftis. I think I said that right. To the NFL, and they lose their top wide receiver who caught almost 100 balls last year, almost twice as many as anyone else, in David Bell. So I think, yes, there's the Purdue magic. There's the, what they did to Iowa last year, what they did to Ohio State several years ago. They have kind of like Iowa, you go you go in there and you kind of expect weird things to happen. I just, and maybe it's because we haven't played a lot at Purdue a whole lot. They're in the other division. We don't seem to go there nearly as much as they go to Iowa City.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't get the same weird things happen at Purdue and Thursday night vibes that seem to be really popular, like you said, whether it's the solid verbal guys or the game day guys. Even we were talking about it a little bit last week on their season opening show. Um, and I think at the end of the day, like I said earlier, Penn State's the more talented team here. And I think you expect that to come to fruition. I think there's a lot of uncertainty because of the last couple years. But if you look at this team on paper and you kind of look up and down the roster, Penn State has the advantage in so many spots that I think, especially with a guy like Sean Clifford, who's seen it all at this point, and you know, some of the guys, Joey Porter, Jair Brown, even guys like Curtis Jacobs, who's in his third year at the program now, PJ Mustipher, who's in his fifth year. You have a lot of guys. You've had a lot of guys in leadership positions who've basically seen everything college football can throw at you. So I'm not sure I buy the hype that I think I might have dropped off there for a second.
Oh, you're fine. You're good.
I guess I just don't buy the Ross-Ade Stadium on a Thursday night with 50,000 people or whatever it is wearing black is going to intimidate Penn State the same way Camp Randall a year ago did, or Kinnick Stadium does on a seemingly annual basis, or going to the Horseshoe. This is a team and a program that's kind of seen everything and gone through a lot more challenging situations.
Yeah. So to focus in on the kind of more specifics of, player v player matchups now, I think one of the things that should also give Penn State comfort here is that the way that Purdue is going to beat you is by throwing the football. Aiden O'Connell, fantastic quarterback. For my money, probably the second best quarterback in the Big Ten after CJ Stroud. Obviously no David Bell, but they're still going to operate primarily through the air. The running game, King Doerue is back, but he's just not that good. 500 something yards last year. Like, the running game is just not really an emphasis for them. And it's, I'm sure they would like to be more balanced than they are, but sometimes that's not always a choice, as Penn State fans saw, front and center last year. So I think the fact that the way that Purdue is going to try to win football games is by going up against the strength of this Penn State defense should be a very favorable thing for the Nittany Lions. I am not, the Purdue defense returns pretty much almost all of its production outside of George Karlaftis and their leading tackler from last year, whose name escapes me right now, but they have a ton of production back. They have a ton of talent back there. I think Purdue's defense in general is just a much better unit than I think the average fan might realize, especially, it's not like Purdue is necessarily a big name or anything. I think this is a much better football team that Penn State is playing tonight than most people would realize, but I don't think it's a very good matchup for Purdue. I think this is going to be really tough for them, I think.
Yeah, I think Penn State's strength is on I think probably as a team is probably in the secondary. Joey Porter Jr., Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy, Jair Brown, Keaton Ellis, Zakee Wheatley, who's gotten a ton of buzz at safety. Even KJ Winston, the freshman, we might potentially see a little bit of, maybe not tonight, but later on in the season.
Yeah,
that's what I just named, 7 or 8 guys. And I think all those guys. I was telling a coworker yesterday, who's a big Ohio State fan, that other than Ohio State, I think most of Penn State's secondary is going to start for anyone else in the Big Ten. And I'm sure you can probably cherry pick a guy here or there from every team, but in general, you've got a lot of guys who would get significant snaps at a lot of places, certainly in the conference. And like you said, Purdue wants to throw the ball. I think the key for Penn State is minimize the big plays, like we were saying earlier. You're going to see more of them because the way Manny Diaz wants to play. I think the other thing, and I think this was a challenge last year at times, is making the tackle. I think Purdue wants to get the ball out quick for the most part. They want to minimize any sort of disadvantage they have on the line by getting the ball out quick and not letting the pass rush get home, which means you're going to put linebackers and safeties and cornerbacks in positions that they need to make tackles to avoid giving up the big play. So I think doing that, I think, like you said, Purdue doesn't really want to run the ball. They're not terribly effective at running the ball. I think those are the keys. Minimizing those big plays, making those tackles, and getting Purdue into situations, which is what Manny Diaz wants to do. Put you in a situation where I know what you're going to do. I know you want to pass the ball. I know you need 8, 9, 10 yards. You need time for those routes to develop. And I have guys like Adiza Isaac or Denis Dennis Sutton or PJ Mustipher, or I can go on, Curtis Jacobs, guys that I can throw at you. I can bring Daquan Hardy, who we saw was really effective last year as a blitzer. I can start doing things that are going to make Aiden O'Connell's life miserable and hopefully force those mistakes.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree. We have about 7 minutes left. Oh, and look at that. Just as I was about to say, let's start getting into predictions. Nittany No Huddle predicting a 31-21 victory. PSU up 7 at halftime. Interesting. I like the specificity. If you're watching, drop your predictions in there. We can read them all out and kind of break this all down together. The only prediction that I think I've actually given on this game so far was when I was over hopping on the preview with Big Time Boiler. If you listen to the podcast, you heard Grant Tribbett hop on our podcast to give us the inside scoop on Purdue. Go check out their channel. He does great. He does a great job over there. Him and I believe it's his brother. I could be wrong about that though. I don't remember. Adam, win or lose, I just want to see a 10+ yard run. Oh, love that. First play, it's coming, man. I think that Nick Singleton is by far the best back on this roster, and I am very much not a fan of Kayvon Lee's running style, but I do think Kayvon Lee somehow ends up going for 100 yards tonight just because, it's going to be kind of his Akil Lynch last hurrah before Saquon or before Nick Singleton. Nick Singleton fills that Saquon role with Akil Lynch and takes over. I want the prediction I gave on their podcast was, I believe I said 31-20 Penn State, but that it would be 24-20 pretty late into the game. And it would either be a late Penn State defensive stop or like a pick six or something that, flips it and makes it look a little more, makes the margin look a little wider than it actually is. I do think this is going to be a good football game. I certainly don't think this is going to be a stress-free jaunt into West Lafayette with a, casual, easy victory to head back out to Happy Valley with. I think this is going to be a battle. This is a good Purdue football team, much better than the average fan probably realizes. Not saying that any of you are average fans. You're not. You're top of the line. But this is going to be a tricky game for Penn State, I think. Where are you at with this?
I hadn't even thought about a prediction until a buddy texted me earlier today that
and the line is 3.5 now, by the way. Penn State
it hasn't
by
moved
3.5
in about 6 months. It feels like feels like it's been 3.5.
It opened at 2.5 like a month and a half ago, I think.
Okay, I got it at 3.5 probably about a month ago, 4 weeks, I don't know. So I told my buddy 38-28. I don't know where that came from. I feel like I think this is one of those games that, kind of like you said, Nick, stays close for a while. I think Purdue, especially opening the season at home, big crowd, big game. I think they're going to come out with a lot of juice, and I think there's going to be a matter of weathering the storm to some degree for Penn State. But I think they get through that storm. They're going to give up some points. It's just an offense like Jeff Brom runs. It's going to happen. But I think Penn State weathers, and I think gets to whether they're ahead or not, I think is not necessarily relevant. But I think they get to halftime. It's a ball game, and I think they kind of shades of 2016, maybe, if you will, where they kind of get themselves right a little bit in the locker room and come out. And I think you see a more, I won't say dominant, but I think a much more comfortable team in the second half that kind of has their hands wrapped around what Purdue wants to do and how they can exploit it on both sides of the ball. I think you're going to see, really excited to see Parker Washington now as kind of the guy along with Mitchell Tinsley. Obviously, really excited to see the running backs. I don't think Penn State's really had a running game like they're going to potentially be able to put together this year, with the depth of it, probably since, the Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders tandem. Ernie Brown was certainly great, but I don't think there was that depth of talent behind like Penn State can roll out this year. Really excited. I think, I hope, I pray, I wish on anything you can wish on that the offensive line, shows that they've taken that step. I think what gives me confidence, I guess, for the team as a whole is there's this quiet confidence about them, but I think especially on the offensive line, I think there hasn't been a lot of intentionally, there hasn't been a lot of platitudes thrown their way, really all off season. There's been a lot of I'm not going to talk about it. They're going to, we want them to show you. I think part of that is they're sick of talking about it, but I think part of that too is I think they know that they've kind of got something that's come together a little bit more than it's come together in previous years. I'm not saying they're going to all of a sudden be, the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs offensive line, but I think it's going to be better. And I think it's going to improve as the year goes on. And I think having an experienced quarterback like Sean Clifford, having that talent at running back is going to help them out. I think you're going to see a really big game from at least a couple guys in the secondary. I'm not going to try and guess who because fool's errand, but I think you're going to see, that talent that we've talked about really, since last season ended, about what Penn State's brought back in the secondary. I think you're going to see that shine. Maybe not right away, but I think once they kind of, like I said, figure out what Purdue's doing and what they want to do, you're going to see that talent kind of rise to the surface a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all those points make a lot of sense. So, before we get out of here and call this a successful first live stream, that was Matt putting down 38-28 is his prediction in the books. I had 31-20. As we said, the line is currently at 3.5. You can still snag it. You got about half an hour to do that. I believe SP Plus, Bill Connolly's numbers, had it as a Penn State 28, Purdue 24 win, if I remember correctly, something like that.
It was 28-24, 24-20, something like that.
Yeah, so just barely covering. So yeah, I mean, this should be a fun football game. Hopefully not too stress inducing, but it's never a bad thing to get the stress juices pumping a little bit week one to just toss you right back into the college football fire. We're hoping this will be, a big season for Penn State, and we hope that we get to see the very start of it tonight. We hope that we get to see something special brewing right from the get-go here. So, it's 4:30. We want to give everyone, not that you're obligated to be here by any means, but we want to give everybody time to do what they need to do. Or sorry, 4:30 Pacific time. I live in Seattle. It is 7:30 on the East Coast, where most of you presumably are. Although we do have
it's gotten progressively darker here as we've gone along.
We do have a lot of listeners, at least on iTunes, through Apple Podcast, a odd number of listeners that are in Seattle, and they're not me because I don't use Apple Podcasts. So it's a little strange. But we want everyone to have time to do what they need to do before the game, but we greatly appreciate you following along here with our first live stream. We hope that hope the video looked good. Hope it wasn't too choppy. Hope that it's been fun to follow along. And if you have any suggestions on how we can kind of spice this up in the future, please leave comments. We'll go back and we'll check them. But if you think we need to put out calls earlier for questions, or if we need to, kind of plan out our segments a little more so what's coming when you want to hop on, whatever it is. If you have any sort of suggestions, please leave them for us. And if you're not already following the podcast, we are on, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, Google Play. Is Google Play a thing anymore? Overcast, all those different podcast sites. You can find us on there. Just Roar Lines Roar, a Penn State football podcast. if you have the opportunity to do so, please subscribe there, and also subscribe on YouTube. I imagine you already are if you are viewing this, but if you, on chance, if you're not, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also hit that alert button to make sure that you're notified when we, for example, go live. But greatly appreciate everyone listening in. Visit Home Field if you have the chance to do so. You use that code ROARLIONS for 15% off your order. But I'm ready for some football. I don't know about you, Matt, but I'm ready to get this season underway. I'm Nick
I am
Pollock.
excited. This has been it's been a long off season.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Nick Pollock. That's Matt DeBear. We are Roar Lions Roar. Let's go State.